Hello everyone, and thank you guys for joining us here today on our Manufacturing Future live stream from Industry 4.0 Club. I am joined here today by my co-host Ira Sharp, and we're also joined here by Sandeep Sreekumar from IndustryApps. Um, and our topic today is IoT slash IoT and OEM. So really talking about how OEMs are utilizing these new technologies, what they're doing, and basically we're going to base it off an article that Ira you posted in LinkedIn not too long ago. Got a lot of good attention, and it was a repost of IoT Insights that had done a fairly broad article about OEMs, where they're going today, what they're doing with IoT. And so, great article, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. But first, some introduction here. My name is Jan Pingo, and when I'm not here with these great co-hosts and speakers, I am a product leader for Ingersoll Rand, where I lead our integration of equipment in the Americas, where we are integrating our equipment with IoT, and as I often say, it make it smart and connected. Ira, over to you.
Yeah, so thanks, Yen, and excited to be here as always. Of course, I'm a co-host here at the Industry 4.0 Club, and then in addition to that, I'm director of product marketing for the automation products at Phoenix Contact, and just really enjoy educating and engaging with the community on all topics automation. So IoT, Industry 4.0, networking, control systems, whatever it may be. And really excited to have Sandeep here with us today from IndustryApps. And Sandeep, maybe you could do a quick introduction to yourself.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thanks, Ira. Thanks, Jan, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. So, yeah, myself, Sandeep, I'm co-founder and CEO for this company called IndustryApps. 23 years in the industrial digitalization space, has been sort of running these programs for various companies, automotive, chemical, food, apparel. So I've been done quite some time in this, and yeah, happy to be here.
Well, thanks for having you. Thanks for having you.
Thank you.
So, I think we're best starting with maybe a quick review of your article, Ira, and I think you would be the best one to kind of give us that background. But it was a good article, a lot of good comments. So, if you want to just give a quick rundown of your maybe perspective of what you put in there.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So, looking at the post that I made on LinkedIn, I mean, you're calling it an article, and I think maybe you're giving it too much gravitas, maybe for what it was. But it was a post, my comments, my thoughts on the wonderful article from the IoT Analytics on a topic that I know is near and dear to my heart, which is looking at IoT business and really looking at OEMs. How can OEMs use this? Because so often when we think about digitalization or we start talking about digitalization, whether it be in the Industry 4.0 Club or other places, a lot of it's based on the users, the end users, and that's a great place, and that's probably where some of the biggest adoption is happening, and it's a very defined use case. But I have been fascinated with the idea of OEMs integrating this and making it a core part of their business and flowing into things like equipment as a service and all these other areas here. And in this article, it really focused on a couple of core things here. It was really talking about making the case for connected equipment. It was developing an IoT product or a product that includes IoT, developing a business model, and then ultimately commercializing it. I mean, this is like perfect scenario for if you really want to understand what's needed. I think a lot of it is encapsulated here, and I'm sure in the 200 plus pages they have in their expanded report, there's much more information. But there's a couple of key statistics here that I pointed out in my post that I thought were interesting. And even prepping for this call in the few minutes that we had, there may be some differences of opinion here. So it could be fireworks on this live stream. But, you know, it says here in the article that there's 40% product mix that are connected devices in this OEM space. And I personally thought that was extremely high for the industry. I don't know that there's really that many connected devices out there. Excuse me. Although I know that there's a lot of striving out there to become more and more connected. I think there are some manufacturers that have done a fantastic job at connecting things. And I know you work for a manufacturer that does have some connected devices, so great to hear what that really is. But I just thought that that number was a little high, and really the trend was striving to a 54% connectivity rate for companies by 2026. So that ramp is even higher. And of course, there are amazing reasons of why companies would want to IoTify their equipment, because they can get more information about it from an OEM perspective, which can allow you to uh, more improve your product. It can help you maybe from a marketing perspective. It can help you for all kinds of reasons. And then from a user perspective, if you really do get that data there locally at that site, you can use it to inform your operations better. You can have more insights and more data. And I think that's where Sandeep can and offer some great insights with his particularly experience and some of this integration, particularly as it pertains to the asset administration shell and how all that can be utilized to kind of normalize your data. So, and just to finish my thought here, and then, Jan, maybe I'll kick it over to you to hear
Yeah.
from an OEM perspective, and then we can hear from a site perspective. When you look at some of the use cases that IoT analytics had in this report, I think I get where this number is, because some of the biggest users they had were BMW, John Deere, Schneider, and they didn't say Tesla, but they could have used Tesla as well. And when I think about that from an OEM perspective, it does make sense, because you're making equipment that is being sold to users that really need that connectivity. BMW getting information about their cars and vehicles, John Deere with all their agricultural connected equipment. And I know there's some ideas and concepts there of, well, how locked in is that equipment to their ecosystem from a right to repair standpoint. Schneider with their elevators, and then Tesla, the one I'll add that's not part of this. I mean, they had like what 5 million cars or things sold by I think the beginning of 2024. So they have a lot of connected devices. So there is a major trend, but I do wonder, are some of these really big use cases pulling up the average? Where if you look at the standard in the OEM industrial space, are they doing things as much? So
Yeah.
there's a lot more to unpack and a lot more things we can go into here. But maybe Jan, working for an industrial OEM, what are your thoughts on that, and what are your experiences?
Yeah, sure. So, looking at the data that you presented and that you questioned a little bit, the 40% revenue share made of products that are connected. Um, it sounds a little high, but if you think about it, it's on average, it depends on the industry, it depends on the equipment. But let's say that equipment in the field from an OEM that are serviceable, meaning it's not too old, it's not breaking down, it's not something that's ready for replacement. It's probably, let's say, 15 years. Let's say a piece of equipment in the field is 15 years. And industry vary from, or every industry vary, right? So there might be industries out there where the equipment could be 30 years. And there'll be others out there where it's only 5 years before you've got to replace it, right? But let's say an average of 15 years. And then you look at how many years have OEMs been working on connecting that equipment, and that's probably somewhere between 5 to 10 years, depending on again when those specific industries started thinking about connectivity. So, for example, from Ingersoll Rand, we have been connecting equipment from 5, 6, 7 years now, right? Although our equipment, we maintain equipment that might even be 25 years old. But that 40% now that kind of makes sense if you're looking at an average of 15 years, 5 to 7 years you've been maintaining this. So it's somewhere between 30 to 50%, and so 40 is right in the middle there. So that makes sense to me. And then the growth rate of 40 to 54 actually sounds low to me, because I mean we're looking at doubling our connected assets every 2 to 3 years, and that means that would be a higher percentage. So if I was going to double 40% of my install base, that would at least be 60%, I think. So maybe a little bit low. I don't know. But again, it is based on a mixture of a lot of different industries. So those numbers, I think, make sense. Something you can compare to is I was presenting at the ARC forum in January on Edge and IoT, and there is a Gartner article out there that Forbes had kind of pulled in, but it had been looking at manufacturers, and they aim to triple their what's called X as a service revenue by 2030. And so in order to do like equipment as a service, product as a service, whatever as a service, basically, right? You need to be connected. You need to have that remote connectivity to understand what's going on with the equipment, so you proactively can react to if something's going on, and you can use that information to remotely diagnose what could be wrong with the machine. So when you get on site, you fix it right away. And so if you want to triple that, current service revenue with X as a service, that's a huge number to me, um, because again, access to service means everything. So if I am in any way servicing a machine, I'm doing something as a service in some respect if I'm connected. And so that's one of the things that we're doing from English ORAN, is that our initial IoT initiative came from our service organization to say, well, we have a level of service that where we are taking all the cost of doing the service. So if we in some way can use tools to make sure that when we go on site, we fix it right away. If there's some way we can see something and guide a customer to actually, making a switch or doing something different can make the machine work again without us having to come out and diagnose the problem, that increases our margin significantly, right? And so that was the initial perspective from an IoT perspective from English ORAN, was to look at our service organization. And so, as an example, which we talk about all the time, is before we had assets connected, we had about 65% of our visits was a one trip. We go out in one trip and we have the right parts in the truck with us and we go fix it, which means that the 35% was two or more trips. That means that we come on there, diagnose the problem, we don't have the part, we go order the part. When the part comes, we install it, find out that there's something else that was the cause as well, and we're missing that part, so we kind of come back on the third time and fix it, et cetera, right? After putting in IoT, we're doing 90% of our service visits are one trip or less, and only 10% is two trip or more. And of that 90%, 50% of those trips are zero trips. That means we can diagnose something online saying, hey, the simplest one that always happens is that somebody they press the emergency stop, and that's how they stop the machine at night, which is not really the right way to do it. And now next morning it's not starting up. Okay, that's a simple one. But there are other things where we can see, like the intake. There's some temperature difference on the intake that it might be blocked or something, or so we ask a question: Did you put something in front of the compressor over there, or is a door suddenly open so there's hot air from the outside, or et cetera, right? Oftentimes we can actually, well, 50% of the time, we can diagnose the problem and get the machine up and running without us even having to go on site. So that's huge. That is just huge. And then comes all the other stuff, all the way down to equipment as a service, that we can now provide information to the customers through a portal. We can have them see, based on a trip happening, they can see what did we do to service it, because we now integrate service information back to the customer, et cetera, et cetera. So there's all kinds of things that this IoT connectivity will provide and bring to our business back to our customers. But Sandeep, I'm interested in hearing your perspective as well, as somebody that both provide applications to end customers, but also OEM. What are you
Yeah.
seeing the OEM talking about, and what are their struggles from your perspective?
Yeah. And again, first of all, I think, there, for me, there's a very clear difference between assets which supports connectivity and connected assets. And I think we somehow has mixed up these two things, right? So if you are saying, can I machine has an protocol that supports connectivity, I support OPC UA, I would say a very large percentage of assets are moving into that. So I agree with that 40 to 50%, where I say my machine supports connectivity and I have ability to connect or offer data. But for me, connected asset is more a business model, right? A connected asset is something beyond asset having connectivity. Yeah? A connected asset concept is really about, is it possible for an original equipment manufacturer to offer services beyond that physical equipment itself? So there is something embedded which is a value addition to the customer, which is beyond that thing that I'm purchasing, right? It's just not the piece of hardware. It has some intelligence in it which I'm able to give you, right? So for me, that's for me a connected asset, right? And when I look at that part of it, I do not think we are anywhere near to even 20%, because such assets are very very low today, right? So most of the focus area today for OEMs is predominantly around this problem statement, saying, oh, how do I offer remote services in a more efficient way? I was delivering remote services before also. This has been going on for many years, but can I offer something better now? When I look at it from a factory standpoint, I basically deal with equipments, and when I talk to customers and when I go to factories, the typical answer we get is, all the new machines we purchased allows you to take data. All the old machines I have, there's absolutely nothing, right? You cannot really. So you have to sort of add an IIoT sensor on top, and then the OEMs are like, okay, do I need to? So they are in a dilemma also. Do I need to support the customer on this, or should I just say, okay, please upgrade all your assets, right? So that is the situation currently. When I look at it from an end customer point of view, there is an, every company, every factory, except the green fields we so called talk of, right? Most of them has a mixture of old and new. So they have assets that supports this OPC UA type of connectivity, and they have a large portfolio of assets which are the old. But from a customer value point of view, I want to get services for all of them, right? I want to be maintained. So from an evolution point of view, what I'm seeing is OEMs are sort of going in from that old style of maintenance to, I am able to support you, I am able to give you more services, and then I am able to get you to upgrade your machines to newer one, because then I can offer you more services, right? So this is sort of the channel in which they are going. And if I look at it from a customer standpoint, right, if you think, what is the reason why equipment as a service model is sort of talked about, right? It's not, I do not really believe that it is really mainstream yet at this moment. It's still, people are talking about it, they're thinking about it, but you still see major orders coming for OEMs, right? They're still buying machineries. But the biggest challenge that you are seeing is the way the market is changing, right? And over the next 4 to 5 years, or next 10 years, everything is unpredictable today, right? So you saw that shift from oil to electrical, EVs, and then we are talking about hydrogen now. That shift is exponential. So the way things are changing is super fast. Now imagine I'm a company and I want to sort of set up a business, and I'm purchasing the equipment. The biggest challenge I have is whether I will be able to capitalize this investment that I'm doing. And I get, for example, when you say 15 years of lifetime, the most important part is, do I have 15 years of business to support this, right? Maybe the business doesn't exist after 5 years, something completely, there is additive manufacturing coming, maybe I don't need this sort of machining anymore. So there's a lot of confusion coming up in people's mind, and that is where equipment as a service comes in as an important pillar, where that risk can you remove from the business, and you pass on that risk to really the OEM, saying, yes, you offer me that, I'm going to pay for value, I'm going to pay for how much I'm going to use it. And that is where IIoT becomes very critical, because one, as an OEM, I need to have a very stable way to understand my equipment's usage, so that I'm able to build them correctly, right? Because when you say about equipment as a usage, it's certainly not an one-time payment on a monthly fixed cost. This is not how it should work, right? It should be really usage driven. So it's like, let's say in the case of laser printing, it's really like how many pieces have I printed last month. I'm going to charge you based on that, right? So how many things I've stamped. So a lot of very granular information needs to be collected and needs to be structured in order to run such a model. You need to have billing cycle, you need to have automatic ordering, you need to have automatic payment system. This whole process needs to run as an engine, and otherwise, if you're putting humans in between to drive this, believe me, this process won't work. So for me, equipment as a service model is a complete package of processes, from deployment of an equipment, data collection, monthly, again finding out that value based pricing model, sending them an invoice, collecting that payment, and this whole thing running in itself. So this for me is the journey. This is where it is going, and I really think this is where the machine manufacturers will move into, and that is where data modeling, data standardization becomes important, because you cannot assume that all your customers will only buy your new machines. There will remain a section of all the old equipment which you would need to retrofit with extra sensors and IIoTs, so that you are able to deliver those services. And the reason why we believe that service market will grow exponentially is because, not because I'm going to get all that services from my new machine. That big chunk of that money will come because you will let me run my old machines longer, because
Yeah.
that's value for me, right? If I could get, I have 10 new machine, I have 40 old machine. If I can get my 40 old machine to run instead of 15 years, 20 years, I am open to pay you 30% margin on it, because I'm still in a positive, right? For me, that would be the business model. That is where it will really, I mean, and that is what, from my point of view, that is what customers are looking for. They are looking for services, not for by buying new machines, and they are not looking at equipment as a service only for the new equipment. They are saying, can you make equipment as a service even for your older equipment which I have, but now you shift from a pricing model which is purely based on subscription and usage.
Yeah, you're hitting some interesting points from my perspective, at least, especially when you're talking about the change, or the switch of the risk over to the vendor as opposed to the end customer. So from Ingersoll Rand, that was one of the key elements of our services, that we have a service level where we take over all of the risk. And so that, from a customer perspective, it's not equipment as a service, because they still buy the equipment
Buy the
from us,
equipment.
right? But then we add a service agreement on top of it, where we take the entire risk, including if something breaks to the point where the machine has to be replaced, we will replace it. But we take over like a 5-10 year contract, whatever it is that the customer is interested in, and then we service both new and old. And that's what we're looking at sometimes, is that some of the older machines, they might have a controller with Modbus connectivity or something like that, and we can still connect to it and still get some benefits. And then we have some really old machines that we would have to come up with something completely different. So, for example, like installing vibration sensors and temperature sensors and pressure
Correct.
sensors, and that gives us not exactly enough information to fully diagnose the issue with the machine, but it gives us enough information to understand in what area might the issue be. So when we come on site, we have what we need to fix the machine. So the risk part, I think, that's huge. It all the way to equipment as a service, and I mean, you hit a new point that I didn't think about too, is that the uncertainty. Like if I'm going to buy a piece of equipment that will last 20 years, but what if my business only lasts 5? That's a very interesting perspective I didn't think about. That manufacturers has to consider sometimes, especially now with all the changes that you mentioned. Um, that if the vendor has a business model that would offer that customer something that removes the risk of that decision, that's huge.
So, so, so it is interesting, as we're talking about, these finance models for recurring revenue,
Yeah.
and how an OEM can get that, and obviously that's a huge benefit to the OEM. I would argue that it's also a benefit to the user, because you can defer costs, right?
Correct.
You could argue, we all lived through the COVID times where we all ended up with too many streaming services. You can get too many services at one time in any
It
one
is possible,
location.
huh?
So we do have to, and I think we've all kind of experienced that in some degree. And I think manufacturing may be similar, right? You could get this service and that service, and when you look at all that, it becomes OpEx versus CapEx, and that does change your whole accounting models. And it will be interesting to see, particularly with a decent size operation, how that can really change. And I don't know if either of you have experiences with that, but that's something that comes to mind is how does that work operationally? How does that work
Yeah,
from an
I
accounting
definitely have
perspective?
to. Yeah.
And just one other note before maybe I kick it over to you guys to point or to discuss that, is I did want to point out in this IoT analytics report, there were a couple of concerns or like barriers that you had to overcome, and there was three that were listed. I'm sure there's many more. Number two on that list was something both of you brought up, and I think it's a really good point, which is the integration to legacy stuff. It's not just about the new. The new is actually kind of easy because you can build it
Correct.
in
Oh
and you
yeah.
can figure out, you can buy it, you can finance it, or you can do the software or equipment as a service. It's the old. What do you do with everything else? Great, I got the new shiny, but I got 57 of the old ones over there. What do I do with it? So,
Yeah.
any ideas on the finance piece of this, or even on the insurance piece of it? Really those pieces
It,
that we don't necessarily think about.
I think every manufacturer of large equipment struggle with that, and we do as well. So when our air as a service offering is something called air over the fence, and what that really means is that we're going to go buy a, a piece of land next to the manufacturer, right next to it. We're going to build a small building. We're going to put compressors in it. We're going to get electricity to it, and then we're going to run a pipe over the fence into that manufacturer. And the reason why we're doing that is exactly what you're talking about: is the who owns the equipment when it's on a customer site, who insures it, who pays for the electricity that goes to that. So do we have to now have a separate meter on just the compressor room at a facility so that the manufacturer will pay for that electricity, et cetera, right? That all those kind of elements makes it harder. It's a lot easier to put a copy machine into a business and say, hey, you guys are going to pay for the electricity, and it's not a lot, so don't worry about it, right? And the if the building burns down, yeah, we can handle that. I mean, we can self-insure somehow and make sure that we handle it, or we don't worry about it because the cost of that copier is not the same as a $200,000 compressor, right? It's a whole different ball game, and
Correct.
I don't know how we do it from our industry, but I'm still sometimes uncertain about people that are talking about equipment as a service. Like for example, one of the typical examples is like Rolls Royce. The engine on an airplane from Rolls Royce is airtime as a service. So how,
Correct.
how many hours in the air is that motor bringing the plane in the air, right? And so that's tied directly to the asset, although it's not tied to physical location because the airplane is flying all over the place, but it's still tied to the end customer's asset, which is the plane. And I'm not sure how they fully do it with taxation, and the insurance and all that those other components. It's a complex area.
It's a
And then the
complex
other
area.
part too is one of the things that we looked into originally, many years ago when we were trying to do air as a service, even before IoT, but it was just like that was a business model we were looking at, right? Is our margin on our equipment is of course reasonable, like you have in that industry. That means that there's a list price and then there's an actual cost for us. But if we're going to go sell the equipment to ourselves to run that kind of business, we have to sell it to ourselves at list price instead of at cost, because we cannot compete with, it's just a taxation thing. I think if we otherwise there's too much creative financing around stuff. If you can just say, well, it only costs $1, right? No, it costs more than that. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do there. So from a rules perspective or legal perspective, we have to basically, that machine has to cost the same as if you sold it to the end customer to yourself, right? So there's tax involved, there's insurance involved, there's all kinds of different things involved. And then the other thing that we talked about before the call here is, um, It's a whole different business model. And that means that you got to go back to your investors and say, hey, we're changing our business model. Last year, we made, let's say, $100 million in selling equipment. This year, we're going to make $35 million in the service for the first year of all the new equipment we sell. We're not going to make the 100 million. We're going to make maybe 30 or 40 million. And then we're going to make another 40 million the next year, another 40 million the next year, up until 10 years. And then suddenly we made 400 million, as opposed to we only have sold $400 million dollars of equipment. So there's all kinds of different things you got to think of when you go to that kind of business.
Yeah.
Sandeep, I
Yeah,
mean,
what
what
do
are
you
your
think?
thoughts there?
Yeah, look, I agree with Jan that there is a lot of legality, there is a lot of things that needs to be solved. But for me, these problems will get solved the instant there is an economic value into it. That's the nature of it, right? There will be an insurance company. I remember Alliance even thinking about it already, saying that they want to insure factories, they insure assets. So this is just a matter of finding that economic viability, that there is a money, there is a creation of value that it generates. So yes, there is a lot of problems, there are still a lot of loose ends that needs to be tied. uh, but for me it is more an administrative thing that needs to be tackled. So the bigger problem is really the tussle between these companies decision makers on how and whether we are ready for the change, right? It's a big change, right? Like Jan mentioned, it's a
Okay.
big change. People are concerned about it because something is working, maybe it's only 100 million, but then I'm worried, if I switch, will I lose that 100 million, right? So this is a problem. So I personally believe it will be a transition. It will be a transition mainly because eventually this capital based industry will start falling. uh, because there will be options. Imagine there is a company who is selling and who is established for 50 years, and then there is a new manufacturer coming from nowhere who is also having an equipment, but he openly announces that I'm going to give it completely on equipment as a service model, and you start sharply losing your margins and your boundaries and stuff like that. And that is where companies will be forced to think different, right?
Yep.
So there is, these things are going to happen. Like when I look at Chinese cars compared to German cars, I realize that there is a lot of things that companies are forced to change when a new entrant come in with a completely disruptive business model, and you suddenly see that they are capturing a huge market. So you really have no choice. So these are going to happen over the next, I think in the next 5 to 10 years. I believe there will be someone or some group of companies who will say, okay, we are gonna go ahead and try this because I'm not the market leader now, but I'm gonna capture a big chunk of this market. And then you suddenly see that rest of the teams are forced to follow that norm and that thing. So this is eventually what I believe is going to happen. Some new entrants would come in the OEM in every sector, and they will say, okay, we are going to do this. Maybe they will rebrand themselves just to avoid that challenge. Some companies may create some completely different company who say, this company of ours will be simply offering businesses as a service. So that's a very different legal entity, different business model, and they run it separately as an sort of a startup within a corporate company. Yeah.
Yeah, we saw that with COVID, right? There were companies that had to change their business model. They had to find new ways to do either the same or something similar or something adjacent. And they did, right? There's all kinds of new ideas that came up during COVID. One of the other things when you mentioned Ira, the kind of the hurdles and struggles that OEMs have to come through. There was the other one I want to talk a little bit about. That's also a legality thing or regulatory thing. Is the IT side, the data security, data privacy, data ownership kind of thing. And maybe we want to start with Sandeep on your thoughts on those key elements when you
Yeah.
talk about OEMs and their data.
Yeah, so basically what has happened over, like for example, there's a couple of companies I know already who does this data collection from customers and offer services, right? Now if you look at the way they have done it, is they have basically their own cloud layer. They are pushing data from the customer's equipment to their cloud, and they are offering services over that. Now one of the challenge here is, yes, the customer's data is coming into your cloud and you're segregating it, you're running some sort of a learning, AI, machine learning, whatever it is on top of it, and then you're passing a service to the customer. Now, finally, in this context, who is the data owner, right? And who owns the data? Is it the manufacturer who owns the data of the things as part of delivering the service, or is it the customer still have ownership on that data which is passed on to the vendor's cloud? Now, if the customer has the data, will the OEM provide access to that data in some form to the customer to download and use it in some other form, right? And now, when the new regulations are coming up, and there is actually a lot of them that is coming up in Europe, we have, the OEMs would have to make sure that they are able to hand over that data to the customer environment, right? They would need, at any moment, I could say, I need access to my data, and you would need to deliver that data. Now, the another problem of it is the country lies, right? For example, there is a lot of regulation coming in terms of that you are not allowed to move that data outside that country's area, right? Now, how do I do this? How do I do these services, and how do I handle this multi decentralized data flow? So this is where, again, there is organization consortiums like GIA that is working on this, but fundamentally this all points to one thing, that finally this industrial ecosystem will run on a completely decentralized data model. It will be no central data structure. There will be no manufacturer who would say, I'm going to put it all in my cloud and handle it. It needs to run in a completely distributed way. So the manufacturer should be able to offer a service, though the data still remains on the customer's data layer or on a cloud layer which is close to customer. So I may need to keep my data in Europe, I may need to keep the data in US, I may need to keep the data in Asia, but I still should be able to deliver the service. Now, this is where I said the whole architecture in how equipment as a service needs to run is different from how it was done before. The whole idea is not about I pump all the data and I can move everything into my area and then I offer a service. It needs to be in a layer where data can be kept in an area where customer is comfortable with, and then customer has ability to subscribe to your services, right? And customer is the one who is saying, yes, I would like to subscribe to your service, and I am giving permission for those data to pass to you, right? This is similar to how you use WhatsApp, right? When you use WhatsApp, we are basically asking for access to your contacts, and you are saying, yes, I'm giving you access to my contact because I want to use that service. Now, this is sort of providing a legal background to you to say that I am having an agreement with my customer because I am offering you this service, I am delivering, getting that data, right? Now you are protecting yourself from every boundaries, right? You are saying,
Mm-hmm.
I deliver you service, you give me the. It is very different from the earlier scenario where you are saying, I take all the data from the machine, I deliver you some service. This is very different because then there is nothing that a customer has ability to control. He cannot revoke that access. Either I say I don't use completely your service, or and if I have to do that, I have to give complete bundle of data to you, and then I don't know what you do with that data. Here, the
I would
whole
like to dig
approach
into
is
that
very
a little
clear.
bit. I would like to dig into that a little bit with you. So we have large corporate customers that's coming to us and say, hey, I know you do some really smart machine learning, AI on our data. Can you tell us what it is you're doing so we can do it in our own system, so that our data stays inside our environment and we can
Correct.
do the same? And
Yeah.
we're not really pushing back, but we're telling them, do you really want to do that? Because think
Yeah.
about it. I'm connected to 10,000 pieces of equipment. I'm learning from 10,000 pieces of equipment. You're going to connect to seven. What do you think you're going to learn compared
Yeah.
to what I'm going to learn?
Yeah. And
Right?
yeah, and this is exactly right, and this is the reason when you look at predictive maintenance type of projects, 80% of these projects did not really return any value. Yeah, means there is, and the reason is because a company with 10, 20, 30 machine is trying to understand the machine where he has no expertise. He has no clue how it works. So he's trying to stick a a vibration sensor on it and trying to understand. And this machine fails only once in a year. So your
Exactly.
ability to model something like that doesn't exist. So I am still with the strong belief that the best person who is capable of offering a predictive maintenance model is the manufacturer of that machine, because they have the expertise, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean I need to move the data out. I can offer that model on top of the data, and I can run it on his data, and he can still get that service.
That,
So
that, that depends though, right? Because then if the vendor doesn't get that data from that machine, that means at some point they'll tell you, okay, we've learned something from our 5,000 machine. Let's just take a number.
I
And
think
now
Sandeep,
every one of our
yeah,
customers don't want anyone connecting anymore. So we can only, this is really the same with what's going on with generative AI right now, right? If I don't keep on teaching the model from new events, it's not going to learn anything more than what it originally learned, right?
yeah, yeah,
So
no,
from our perspective, we want to keep on getting there because we see new things happening all the time, and we want to make sure we can put that back into our system so that we provide insights back to our customers. Says, hey, this is now happening in this particular industry, in this particular area of the world, and just happened to your machine as well.
yeah, no,
You
and
can't
again,
just
yeah, this comes down to a little bit different. For example, we are talking about, you have different types of problem statement, right? There are things which you already have knowledge on because you guys have been building equipment for long enough. There are some
absolutely.
things which you can already know. You don't
Yep.
have to pre-model it because that model can already give a very good learning. Now there are some things which are very execution related. You really want the customer to offer you those extra data layer because it's giving you some extra learning, right? So
Yep. Yep.
now, as long as this is done in a way where, let's say I'm buying your machine, with the machine you are providing me a set of and apps, right? For me, that is the reason I think apps is something people can connect to. I'm buying a machine, you are giving me a store saying, here is the three applications which can run plug and play, because these are we have built it, we know how that model works. Switch on the machine, subscribe that app, give access to that application to your data, it will just work, right? And those works. And now there is a fourth one where you say, okay, now this one is a little bit thing, because I'm gonna take that data to my cloud, I'm gonna do some processing, I'm gonna do something before that service works, right? That are the data point you really need to move to your learning engine, right? And these are like, again, this is like how we go into websites and sometimes says, okay, are you ready to send your logs? I'm gonna do some study and do, at the end it's all about that permission, right? And we need to bring that same ability to tell the customer that I would like to request this data because I'm going to give you this service. Are you okay with it? And if he says, yes, I'm okay to, because I would like to subscribe the service from you, I'm okay to hand over the data to you. You really close that problem statement saying, you are really taking the data and without really having an ability for customer to revoke that access at some point. In this case, the customer can any moment go and say, I revoke this access, and then you are away out from all your the legal problems that you could eventually face,
Right.
right? So for me, it is really not about data here or data there. It's about the data owner having the ability to decide what I share and what I not share, when I share and when I do not want to share. As long as that control is with me,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
perfectly
I,
okay.
I have a follow up to that, but I think Ira, you have a question as well, so let you kick that off first.
I'm actually really enjoying the debate, and I think listening to everything, and I got lots of pretty pictures drawn of kind of how I think your minds are working and whatnot. And I love this idea because, if Sandeep, if I understand you correctly, you're saying, hey, this data can basically be published locally, so it can be used locally. And if you have an app or whatever it is model that you have running locally, great. And one of the things that you could have running locally is an opt-in case for the OEM, which then would send that data out to the OEM. And if you opt in, you get more data that comes back to your facility that gives you greater improvement.
Correct.
The key point there is, at any point in time, you can take that switch and you can turn it off and say no more. So
Correct.
sorry, I relate things to my house. So if I'm on Netflix, right, the first time I go on Netflix for the very first time, it's telling me what it thinks the best things are, and then as I watch more and more shows and I opt in to that philosophy, it's going to
Correct.
tell me more and more of what I want. Maybe it tells me periodically what it wants to show me, but it's going to cater more to me because it's learned from that. And I've opted into that. I actually don't know if I can opt out of that, but I've opted into that in that model. So, I think that's great. And the whole idea of decentralization of those types of services, I think is a great philosophy. And we don't have enough time to explore it, but one of the topics I would love to get into at another point in time is, does this somehow relate to blockchain, which I think is an excellent narrative when it comes to a lot of this kind of thing, of how you can protect data and how you can layer it and how you can give opportunity to data and even revoke that or the data at other points in time. So
Yeah, that's a
um,
longer discussion. I don't think we have time
I
for
just
it.
wanted to plant the seed that, hey,
I
this has been
know.
great.
That's a good one.
Maybe we could talk again sometime.
Absolutely.
So.
Yeah, my follow-up would be to I see your point, Sandeep, on the control. And I think in most OEMs, and I'm not sure everyone, but most OEMs, I mean, the customer does have control. They can cut the cord if they want to. They can take the antenna off so you don't have any cellular communication. They can pull the power to the edge device or whatever it is. Or they can even go into the HMI and say, turn off this connectivity. So most of them, I think that's more like a requirement, and I think it's a right requirement that customers ultimately have the control. We have equipment in nuclear facilities. There's absolutely no data we're getting from them. No way in. Yeah, that we're not going to get that at all. So that's the control. But the other thing I wanted to dig into a little bit is that the decentralized apps and model, right? So if the requirement is for us to grow and learn more is for the OEM to get the data. Otherwise,
Correct.
so
Yeah.
so if the OEM is already getting the data, which customer would then want to run anything local that the OEM will still be able to provide from their cloud? Would it make sense to run anything local because the OEM is already getting the
Yeah.
data,
Yeah.
they're already
I
generating
I
the
could I mean
yeah
I could think of a use case or just as an idea,
yeah
but I could think of it as, from an OEM's perspective, you don't necessarily need to know the machine name. You don't necessarily need to know the exact operator. You don't necessarily need to know the exact part that's coming off of that. But for a local operator station where maybe you have an app, maybe you do want to know the name. Maybe you do want to know the operator. Maybe you do need to know the exact time of operation. So you could look at the data. While it could be same, it could be more anonymized going to an OEM where it's just numbers. And from a manufacturing perspective, that is less risky because you don't know on line one at this exact time we had this type of anomaly with this kind of operator. You just know that a bunch of numbers, and you can still get the reference points so you can feed your model and you can understand things better. But locally, you could use it to get more pinpoint that, well, maybe we need to have a corrective action with that operator, or maybe we need to have a training session, or whatever it may be. Because I think there are different use cases of the same data. It's layered. I have no
yeah
idea if
yeah.
that's what you're going to say, but throwing an idea out there of something that I could see.
It goes back to, I think, the biggest problem that OEMs struggle with when it comes to IoT and IoT in this Industry 4 is how do they share back that knowledge to the end customer in a standardized way uh, that does not require the OEM to be integrators, because the problem is that every single customer is a little bit different, and so they would want the data back in different ways, and there is no good standard right now, but there are definitely organizations working on like OPC UA cloud to cloud connectivity. There's MQTT with universal name server and all kinds of stuff. There's some stuff going on, but it's not to the point where I can say this is the standard. If I was an OEM, I should use this standard because then every customer will be able to connect and get the data. But that is the main point. I think that we struggle with as an OEM is that we get customers saying, "Hey, I know I have access to your raw data from OPC UA connectivity, Ethernet IP, Modbus, Profibus, whatever, but I know you do some cool things with it in your cloud. I want to connect to that 15 relevant data points as opposed to the 55 that's on the machine. That, by the way, I struggle understanding. But if I get the 15 data points of a compressor that really means something, that is what I'm interested in, right? And we struggle with how we can provide that back in near real time to the customer in a standardized way that scales for us. But that's really what you're talking about, right? That's really what the customers ultimately want, is that element of that value that an OEM can bring. And we provide the information in a portal, right? And then we get from the customers, yeah, I have hundreds of portals from different hundreds of vendors, right? That doesn't really help me. I want to get the data into my infrastructure, just kind of streaming in, and now I can connect it to my operator at the time. I can connect it to the product I was running at the time. I can connect it to my ambient temperature that I'm seeing in the building, et cetera, right? And I can now do my own machine learning on top of your machine learning that will provide specific value for me that you can't provide as an OEM, because you don't know me. You know your equipment, but you don't know me, right? So that is really the element that we still need to solve, is
Yep.
for most OEMs. I mean, there are OEMs like packaging OEMs that they have an integrator arm that just goes in and says, okay, what do you got? I got privacy historian. Perfect. We got a little tool for that, and now the data flows into your environment from our cloud or whatever it is, right? There are OEMs that are that integrated because that's their business, and then there's OEMs like us that provides a utility like compressed air, and it's going to be hard for us to just be able to, for any customer to say, hey, I want it this way, that way, the third way, the fourth way, the fifth way, 5.5 way, whatever. We just can't scale that. We need a standard that we can just develop
Yep.
to and know that it works.
Yep. No, yeah, you said it right? And exactly that is the problem, right? So, an OEM is only one part of a factory, right? It's just one box, right? And there's a lot, the value chain. If you look at his value comes not by improving one part of the value chain. His value improvement
Absolutely.
is end to end, right? So that is where the data, when an OEM says, I'm going to give you AI and all, typical things that the people think about is, look, I have 40 machines, out of which 10 you say I will give you an AI. What about my rest of the 30 where you won't give me an AI and I have no ability to control only using that 10 machine? I need to use all my 40 machine, and there is very high possibility that my bottleneck even not is that machine. My bottleneck is a machine down the lane which is from another manufacturer who sort of has to work with you. So from an end user point of view, it's sort of a connected ecosystem of assets that needs to be work in sync in order to generate value. So when every OEM starts offering an AI solution in itself in a disconnected, isolated cloud layer level, imagine what an operator or what a factory person is going to look like, right? Because he says, okay, I have 5 different OEMs offering me different machines. I have now 5 portals giving me 5 different AI, and now we need to look at all of these, right, to derive what result is. So, and that
Absolutely.
is where I say the idea should not be about every OEM coming out with their own cloud and their own platform. Fundamentally, they should be offering a business capability. Yes, they can have their cloud where they say, Mr. Customer, please feel free, right? This is okay. But at the end, you need to be offering a business capability. Data management, data storage is not, of course, like you said, you would need to have ability to read that data because you want to improvise your model. But owning the customer's data isn't really any value addition on your end. You just want it to learn the model. After that, you can chuck it out. It doesn't really, you don't need to keep it for 10 years, right? Whereas when I'm relying on you, I may want you to keep the data for 10 years because that's the commitment I have to give to my customers. So all of these different problems comes into picture. That is the reason I believe that customer should have ownership on his data, right? And then he can say, okay, I'm going to pass this data on to this OEM because he's going to give me some business capability which I am able to subscribe it on my platform and I can use them. And I have 10 machine, I can have 5 different apps because these 5 guys gives me, but it's all running in one environment where I am able to interoperate them, right? I'm able to connect them, I'm able to do something with them because data is all coming in one standard, right? That's the final goal, right? And I feel unless that happens, the value creation that we can deliver to our end customer is very limited because, as I said, for an end customer, a smart compressor is only going to be 2% of my end-to-end value, right? Because yes, the compressor is giving me everything is super cool, but that thing is coming to another machine which is consuming that, and that guy is broken down and he has no ability to really react to things. So they have to work together. So I feel that finally when the OEM realize this, when they say, okay, now we really need to think little different, rather than offering everything to customer, I just have to focus on what is that business capability that I am able to offer to the customer, that they are able to plug and play. Like you said, standard is very important, because without standard this whole thing is not going to work, right? So we finally, and I see the standard game is happening, right? Whether it is this or that, for me it's not important whether it is OPC or MQTT. At the end, what is important is there is one data structure, right? That is more important. You can transport it over OPCUA, MQTT, whatever protocols, whatever standards. You just needs to ensure that we all agree on a unified data model structure and then semantic structure, which we can share with everyone, right? And then they say, okay, here is my model, you can take it and then you can parse it and do whatever you want to do. This is my data model, and this is open, and this everyone can use to, right? So, and I think that should be the way. But of course this takes a little bit more time. I think it's an evolution,
Definitely takes more time.
and yeah,
Absolutely.
it takes certainly more time.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're getting close to the traditional end of our live stream here. So I definitely want to make sure that we all got a little chance of digesting what we just heard. So I don't know if I want to start with you, Ira. Any final thoughts?
I just this has been awesome. Like, to be part of this conversation has been great, particularly with the two of you, because of your different views and really connected to the same topic. I really like the idea, and I've prescribed to the idea for quite a while of whatever you want to call it, a localized real-time data collection point, unified namespace, whatever architecture you want to call it, but some point where you can have data come to a central area in a standard way that's contextualized, so then it can be used by other things. If you can get data to that central point, I think it empowers an operation so much, because then it can be old, it can be new, it could be the new shiny, well, it doesn't matter. And from there you can pick and choose what you send off to whatever application you're doing, whether you're
Correct.
charting stuff in your own with InfluxDB, or you're sending it to some ERP or MES or some OEM, whatever it is. But if you can get it to the central point, you can have it in a standard architecture. It is kind of like the lifeblood to really move things on. And as I heard all this conversation, there's lots of nuances to this, but that is one thing that I've always come back to also with these OEMs and having these siloed structures that go all the way up to the cloud. That works until all of a sudden you're on Netflix and you realize the show's on Hulu, and then you have to go to Just Watch as a website to figure out what channel, what streaming service your show is on,
Okay, yeah.
right? Relating it back to what I do with my Roku and trying to figure out where I need to find the latest show. So we'll see how things evolve. But that's the big takeaway that I had, and also I think this was just a fantastic conversation. So thank you for letting me be part of it.
Oh, absolutely, and it's been great from my perspective too. And as a final thought, I'll throw something out there that could spur some ideas for the next show or one of the next shows. Is I think where this could be going is and something we haven't even mentioned yet, but like open digital twin, having something where OEM can share a structure that is standardized in some way that can be consumed by a system at a customer site that has part of not just the raw data, but a digital twin that has the model, some of the smarts built into it, and if it's an open digital twin that can be improved, like constantly being improved by the vendor when they learn more, when they understand more of their equipment. Something to think about, Ira. Maybe one of the future
Yep.
conversations we're going to have. But it wouldn't be fair if I didn't leave the last final thought from our guest, Sandeep. What's your final thought?
Yeah, again, thank you very much, guys. It was an interesting conversation. I always learn. Yeah, and it was good to hear from your expertise also. But yeah, as you said, right, this all points down to digital twin as a standard, right? And I work on this since 2014 onward, and I can tell you that these problems are theoretically solved, right? There's a lot of research that has happened in this problem statement. Again, I think IDTA, I don't know whether you guys heard about it, Industrial Digital Twin Association. There's a big group of companies works on it. And fundamentally, if you look at it, these topics you mentioned about how do we model a data, how do I create blocks of data under each assets, right? And then I'm able to transfer only one block to one company. So there are more than 180 submodel blocks which is already published, right? So there is pretty much everything for maintenance, for quality, for AI, for software delivery. There's a lot of things already being done, right? And it's all about using them, because we do not really want to rewire these, because that's really not helping. So the idea is really that if we could bring in this collaboration on a level where we are really able to use what is being done and evolve from that, I certainly believe there is a great way to go, right? And open source is the way in that context, because we do not really want to limit, we do not want to make it connected to one platform or one vendor. I still believe it has to be an open technology that people are completely open to choose. So but I think this is the way it is evolving. So I really agree that digital twin should be a next talk, and I wish you, both of you guys, best of luck with it. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And
I
and
know,
and
I know Ira has something to say now. You just mentioned this keyword open source.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I won't go down that road. I won't go down that road because we're past time. But I did want to recognize one last thing. Sandeep, what time is it for you right now?
It's 11 p.m.
11 p.m. So, I just wanted to recognize not only, you taking the time and having a great conversation, but you're doing that between 10 and 11 p.m. here. So,
Yeah, thank you.
really appreciate you
Absolutely.
making time for this conversation. It was greatly appreciated, and I truly do think it was a great conversation. So, thanks for being part of the Industry
Thank you.
4.0 Club.
Thanks very much.
Thank you
And,
very
and
much.
with that, we'll end our live stream here today. Thank you everyone for listening. And if you didn't listen live, you can go back and listen to it again, or you can just pull it up based on a note that LinkedIn probably sends to you in like 5 to 7 days that there was a live stream. So click on it and join the live stream and learn something very cool today. And thanks again for Sandeep to join us. And thanks for Ira to be one of my co-hosts again, or a co-host again. We always have some pretty cool conversations both with each other and with our guests. And again, here today, that was just an example of it. So thanks again, everyone, and join us again from Industry 4.0 Club. Tomorrow we have one of our fireside chats. And again, next week, we are planning on having another manufacturing future and fireside chat. And just join us Tuesday and Wednesday, so 12:30 p.m. Eastern, for interesting conversations. And with that, we'll end it today. Thanks, everyone, and have a
Thank you.
great day.
Thanks all.
Thank you.